They didn't even look at me when they said it. My father had the microphone in his hand, his tie slightly loosened, his cheeks flushed from 2 glasses of champagne. The ballroom was packed 200 people, maybe more, all dressed in their best, all watching him with the kind of warm attention you give a man who's about to say something beautiful about his daughter on her wedding day. And he did say something beautiful. For 4 minutes and 30 seconds, he talked about my sister, how she was born early and fought to breathe, how she learned to read at 4, how she lettered in track, graduated top of her class, got into nursing school on a full scholarship, how she was, in his exact words, the living proof that we did something right in this world. The room was misty-eyed. I was sitting at the family table, 3rd seat from the left, next to my aunt and her husband, and I was clapping along with everyone else because my sister was radiant that day, and whatever had happened between me and my parents over the years, I had genuinely wanted to be there for her. Then my father paused. He swirled what was left in his glass and looked out at the crowd with this comfortable, easy smile. The smile of a man who knows the room is his, and he said, "Of course, we have 2 daughters. You've met Rachel." He gestured toward me without fully turning his head, the way you might gesture toward a piece of furniture. We always said if we only got one shot at doing this right. Thank God it was the first one. Laughter rippled through the room. Genuine laughter. Some people probably thought it was a joke. Most probably didn't think about it at all, just another throwaway line in a long toast, something to loosen the mood before the music started. I stopped clapping. My mother was seated across from me. I looked at her. She was laughing too, softly, her hand pressed to her collarbone the way she did when something delighted her. She didn't look at me. My sister, standing next to her new husband at the front of the room, glanced over for just a second. I caught her eye. She looked away. I sat with it for the rest of the toast. I sat with it through the applause, through my father hugging my sister, through the band starting up again, and the clinking of glasses. I sat with it until my hands stopped shaking, and then I picked up my purse, folded my napkin over my barely touched plate, and walked to the exit. My mother caught up with me in the lobby. "Where are you going?" she said. "They haven't even done the first dance yet." "I'm leaving. Rachel." She said my name the way she always did when I was being inconvenient. Flat. Clipped. Like a door being shut. It was a joke. "You know how your father is." "I know exactly how he is," I said. "That's why I'm leaving. Don't make this about you. This is your sister's wedding." I turned around and looked at her. I'd had 28 years of practice looking at my mother without letting her see how much she could still hurt me, and I used every bit of that practice in that moment. "Tell her I love her," I said. "Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't stay." I walked out into the October evening and sat in my car for a long time before I could drive. Here's what you need to understand about my family to make sense of any of this. My sister is 4 years older than me. She has my mother's bone structure and my father's drive, and she has always, from the time I was old enough to understand such things, been the one they were most proud of. I don't say that bitterly. It was just the reality of the house I grew up in. There was a hierarchy, and I was at the bottom of it. And most days that was simply a fact, like the color of the walls or the way the furnace rattled in January. My sister wasn't cruel to me. I want to be fair about that. She was mostly indifferent, which sometimes felt worse. She had her own life, her own orbit, and I wasn't really in it. We shared a bathroom and a last name, and very little else. My parents, they weren't monsters. That's the complicated part. They didn't hit me. They didn't lock me out of the house. They fed me and clothed me and sent me to decent schools, and when I got into college, they paid for it without argument. By any external measure, they were adequate parents. But there is a particular kind of damage that comes not from what people do to you, but from what they consistently fail to do. From the way attention is distributed in a household. From whose drawings go on the refrigerator and whose get shuffled into a drawer. From who gets asked about their day at dinner, and who gets asked to pass the salt. From 1,000 small daily signals that accumulate over years into a single message. You are the less important one. I spent most of my childhood trying to prove that message wrong. I got good grades. I joined things. I tried to be interesting, to be useful, to be needed. For a while in middle school, I even tried to be more like my sister, which is a specific kind of self-erasure I don't recommend to anyone. Eventually, I stopped trying. Not in a dramatic way, Just quietly, the way you stop knocking on a door when you've figured out no one is coming to answer it. By the time I graduated college and moved to Phoenix for a job in marketing, my relationship with my parents had settled into something I could live with. I called on birthdays and holidays. I came home for Thanksgiving when I could. Christmas every other year. We were cordial. We were functioning. I had built a life I was genuinely proud of. A good job. A small apartment with plants I kept alive. Friends I loved. A therapist I saw every other Thursday who had helped me understand, slowly, that the way I'd been treated wasn't a reflection of my worth. Then came my sister's wedding. And then came the toast. I drove back to Phoenix the next morning. I had planned to stay the weekend in Cincinnati, but I packed my bag at 6 a.m., while my hotel room was still dark and I was on the highway by 7. I called my best friend from the road. She picked up on the second ring even though it was Sunday morning and listened without interrupting while I told her what happened. When I finished, there was a silence, and then she said, "Rachel, I am so sorry." That was all I needed. Just someone to say that. Just someone to confirm that I hadn't overreacted, that the thing I felt in my chest wasn't too sensitive or too dramatic, that it was simply true and I was allowed to feel it. I got home, unpacked, watered my plants. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and I thought about what I wanted my life to look like going forward. I thought about it seriously, the way you think about a problem at work, clearly, without sentimentality, and I decided that I was done. Not out of anger. Not as a punishment. Just because I had finally, at 28, understood that the door I had been knocking on my whole life was never going to open. Some doors aren't locked from the inside. Some doors just don't have anyone behind them. And you can spend your whole life standing in that hallway, or you can turn around and find somewhere else to be. I didn't send an email. I didn't write a letter. I just stopped calling. My mother called twice in the first month. I let it go to voicemail both times. She didn't leave messages. My father didn't call at all. My sister texted once a week after the wedding, a brief, "Hey, you okay?" And I wrote back, "Yes, thanks," and left it there. After that, nothing. The silence was easier than I expected. That probably tells you everything you need to know about how much those relationships had been costing me. The years moved the way years do when you're busy enough not to watch them. I got promoted twice at work. I moved into a bigger apartment, this one with a second bedroom. I turned into an office and a balcony where I grew tomatoes in the summer. I started running, badly at first, and then with genuine commitment, until I could do a half marathon without stopping. I traveled to Portugal with my best friend and to Colorado alone, just to see if I could. I fell in love once, seriously, with a structural engineer named David, who was kind and steady, and made me laugh. And though we eventually ended things mutual, gentle, no one's fault, I was grateful for every month of it. My therapist and I spent a lot of time in those years talking about my parents. Not obsessively, not in a way that let them take up more space than they deserved, but carefully, the way you clean out a wound thorough, because leaving pieces behind causes more damage later. I came to understand some things. I came to understand that my father's particular brand of humor, the joke at someone else's expense, the dismissal dressed up as wit, was armor. That underneath it was a man who was deeply uncomfortable with anything he couldn't measure or rank, and I had always been, to him, unrankable, too different from him to understand. And what he couldn't understand, he diminished. I came to understand that my mother's failure wasn't indifference but cowardice. She saw what happened in that house. She saw the imbalance, the disparity, the way the same accomplishment got a different reception depending on which daughter brought it home. And she said nothing because saying something would have required her to choose. And she would never choose. I came to understand that my sister had not had it easy either, in different ways. Being the golden child has its own cage, being asked to carry all of a family's pride, to be the proof that they did something right, that's a weight too. I couldn't hold it against her. What I could do, and what I chose to do, was live my life as if none of them were watching, not to spite them, just because it was the only way to live it honestly. 5 years after my sister's wedding, my phone rang on a Tuesday evening in March. I was making dinner pasta, nothing special, and I had my phone propped against the fruit bowl playing a podcast when the screen lit up with a number I recognized. My mother. I stood there with a wooden spoon in my hand and watched it ring. 4 times. 5. It stopped. Then it started again. I turned down the heat on the stove and picked up. Rachel. Her voice sounded different. Smaller, somehow, or maybe just older. Hi, I said. A beat of silence. I'm glad you answered. What's going on? Your father had a heart attack on Sunday, she said. He's at Christ Hospital. They did surgery yesterday morning. He's stable, but her voice broke slightly and she gathered it back up. He's asking for you. I set the spoon down on the counter. Outside my window, the evening was turning orange over the apartment complex across the street. Rachel? Are you there? I'm here, I said. I know, she started. I know we haven't. How serious is it? She told me. The details, the prognosis, the recovery timeline. I listened carefully, asking practical questions, the way I had learned to approach difficult things. I wrote down the name of the cardiologist and the floor he was on, and the visiting hours. When she finished, there was another silence. I'll think about it, I said. Rachel. I'll think about it, Mom. I'll call you tomorrow. I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a long time. The pasta water was boiling. The podcast was still playing. Everything was exactly the same as it had been 10 minutes ago. I talked to my therapist that Thursday. I had a standing appointment and I almost canceled it because I didn't feel ready to say the thing out loud. But I went. He's asking for you, she said, after I'd told her. How does that land? I don't know, I said. Part of me wants to feel something about it. Like after all this time, he finally wants me there. But another part of me just thinks why? What does he want? To feel better about what he said? To have the version of the story where we reconciled? Does it matter why? Doesn't it? She was quiet in the way she got when she was letting me catch up to myself. I think, I said slowly, that I'm afraid if I go, I'll need it to mean something. And I'm afraid it won't. And if you don't go? I looked at the fiddle leaf fig in the corner of her office that I had watched grow for 3 years. Then I'll spend the rest of my life not knowing if I made the right call. What do you want? I had been asking myself that question for 5 days and I finally had an answer. I want to go, I said. But on my own terms. I'm not going to go there and have everyone pretend the last 5 years didn't happen. I'm not going to sit in a hospital room and perform a reconciliation for an audience. If I go, it's because I'm choosing to, not because I owe him anything. She nodded. That sounds like someone who's done a lot of work, she said. I flew into Cincinnati on a Friday evening. My sister picked me up from the airport. I hadn't seen her in 5 years. She looked mostly the same, her hair shorter now. A few lines around her eyes that I recognized because I was starting to get them too. She was wearing scrubs under her jacket, which meant she'd come straight from a shift. We hugged in the arrivals lane, and it wasn't graceful, but it was genuine. Thank you for coming, she said. How is he? Weak, but talking. You know how he is, he's already arguing with the nurses about what he's allowed to eat. I almost smiled at that. I didn't want to, but I almost did. We drove most of the way in silence. Not uncomfortable silence. We had never been a family that talked much in cars. Near the exit for the hospital, my sister said, without looking away from the road. I've thought about the toast. A lot. Over the years. I waited. I should have said something, she said. That night, I should have walked over to you or told Dad afterward that it wasn't okay. I didn't. And I've been. She exhaled. I'm sorry, Rachel. I mean that. I looked out the passenger window at the highway lights. I know, I said. And I did. It wasn't absolution. She and I had our own conversation still ahead of us, but I believed her, and that was enough for now. My father was in a room on the 4th floor. There were machines and tubes and the particular smell of hospital air that I have always found both sterile and intimate. He looked smaller than I remembered. My father had always been a large man, not just in physical size, but in presence, the way he occupied a room, the way he made you feel his opinion before he'd even spoken it. Lying in that bed with a pulse monitor on his finger, he just looked like a man getting old. My mother stood up from the chair in the corner when I walked in. She looked at me the way she always had when she didn't know what to say, a long, searching look, almost apologetic. Rachel, she said. Mom. She crossed the room and hugged me, and I let her. It wasn't comfortable, and it wasn't resolved, but I let her. My father opened his eyes. For a moment we just looked at each other. 5 years of silence in a hospital room in the middle of a Friday night in March. "You came," he said. His voice was rougher than I remembered. "I came," I said. I pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down. My mother sat back in her corner. My sister stayed near the door. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Like my chest tried to kill me," he said. "The doctors say you'll recover. So they keep telling me." He shifted slightly, wincing. His eyes went to my face and stayed there with an attention he had rarely given me in my whole life. "I've been thinking," he said. "You should rest." "I've been thinking," he repeated, "about a lot of things I did badly." I looked at him. "I'm not asking you to forgive me today," he said. "I'm not even sure I'm asking you to forgive me at all. He stopped. There was something working behind his eyes that I had never seen before, or maybe had never looked for. "I wanted you to know that I know. About the toast. About a lot of things before that. I knew when I said it. I told myself it was funny, and it wasn't. It was a habit, a lousy, ugly habit I had of making you the punchline." The room was very quiet. "I don't know where it came from," he said. "That doesn't matter. It was wrong." I had imagined this conversation in my head maybe 50 times over 5 years. In some versions I cried. In some versions I had a speech prepared. Careful and devastating. Every word chosen to land where it would hurt most. In some versions I was icy and controlled and made him feel every year of silence in a single sentence. In the actual version, I just sat there in a plastic hospital chair under fluorescent lighting and felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, I wasn't there yet. Maybe I never would be all the way. But something. "I'm not here because you're asking me to forgive you," I said. "I'm here because I decided to be. There's a difference." He nodded slowly. "There is," he said. "There is a difference." "I'm going to go get coffee," my sister said quietly from the doorway. My mother stood up. "I'll come with you," she said. And then it was just me and my father in that room, with the machines humming and the lights low, and 5 years of quiet between us. I stayed 3 days. I'm not going to tell you it was easy, or that everything got repaired, because it didn't, and it wasn't. Families like mine don't get fixed in a hospital room on a weekend. There was an awkward dinner the second night at my parents' house, my mother overcooking pasta, and everyone talking around the things we really meant. There was a conversation with my sister that went long past midnight at her kitchen table and covered years of territory we had never mapped before. There were moments that were tender and moments that were tense, and one moment, Sunday morning at the hospital, where my father held my hand and didn't say anything, and I let him. I drove to the airport on Sunday afternoon alone. My mother hugged me in the driveway and told me she loved me, and I said it back, and I meant it. Not the way I might have meant it at 20. Needing something from it, but the way you mean something that is simply true, complicated, and true. On the plane home, I watched Ohio disappear below the clouds, and I thought about what my therapist had said to me once, that the goal was never to get the parents you deserved. The goal was to stop waiting for them and start building something that didn't depend on them. I had done that. The life I had made in Phoenix, the work, the friendships, the plants on the balcony, the miles I ran at 6 in the morning when the city was still quiet, none of that had required their approval. None of it had been built for them. It had been built for me, piece by piece, in the years when they weren't watching, and I finally stopped caring whether they were. That was the thing my father couldn't take from me with a careless joke at a microphone. That was the thing my mother couldn't erase with years of looking the other way. I had built something that belonged entirely to me, and no one's opinion of it, not even the people who were supposed to love me first, could change what it was. I landed in Phoenix at 8 in the evening. The desert air hit me when I walked out of the terminal, warm and dry and familiar. I got in my car and rolled the windows down and drove home with the radio, playing something I half knew, and the city spread out around me, lit up and indifferent, and entirely mine. My father came home from the hospital 2 weeks later. He's in cardiac rehab now, 3 mornings a week. My mother sends me texts, sometimes pictures of the garden, updates on the neighbors, ordinary things, the kind of messages that don't require anything complicated in return. I call every Sunday. Not because I owe it, because I choose to. That distinction matters to me more than I can explain. For most of my life I did things for my family out of obligation, out of the hope that doing enough would eventually mean being enough. Now I do them out of choice, which is the only way I know how to do anything anymore. My sister and I text almost every day now. She's funnier than I realized. Or maybe I was never around long enough to notice. She sent me a voice memo last week, just her laughing about something that happened on her unit. Nothing important, and I listened to it twice. I don't have a neat ending for you. I don't have a moment where everything that was broken got fully put back together and someone said the exact right thing and we all stood in a golden light understanding each other perfectly. That's not how any of this works. What I have is this. I know who I am now. Not because they told me. Not because they finally saw it. But because I stopped waiting for them to see it and looked for myself. My father called me the week he got home from the hospital. Just to talk, he said. We spoke for 20 minutes about nothing in particular, the weather in Cincinnati, a documentary he'd watched, my plans for the spring. At the end, before he hung up, he said, "I'm glad you came, Rachel." "Me too," I said. And I meant both things at once. I'm glad I came, and I'm glad it was my choice. That's the part no one can take from you. Not the people who hurt you, not the years you spent trying to prove yourself, not even the moments when you believed what they said about you. The choice. The door you decide to walk through, and the one you decide to leave behind. That's yours. It always was.